Hello, everyone. So, for the next 2 weeks, we are covering another episode of Maintenance Phase. This episode is called Fen and Redux. And before we get into that, I just want to let the record show that I can no longer watch Maintenance Phase on a website like I could before. Stitcher has been bought out by Pandora, and it's a big fucking frustrating mess. I don't like Apple. And so I'm stuck kind of listening to them through Spotify, which means I am further polluting my Spotify account with this fat acceptance nonsense. So if you enjoy my content and you feel at all sorry for me, please leave a like and a comment to help offset the emotional toll I have to take for polluting my Spotify further with fat acceptance nonsense. Alright, let's get into it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Maintenance Phase. Oh shit. I'm like, God.
Okay, so this was clearly left on 1.5 speed. I'm going to take this down to 1.2 speed just because it seems a little fast.
Description first or name first. Anyway, hi everybody, welcome to Maintenance Phase. We're going to explore the many rabbit holes, past and present, around health, wellness, bodies, and weight loss. My name's your fat friend. I'm a writer and columnist for Self Magazine, and I am a fat lady.
And my name is Michael Hobbs. I'm a reporter for the Huffington Post and the co-host of another podcast called You're Wrong About.
Yay, welcome.
And today we are talking about...
Fen-Phen!
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 Which sounds like the name of a zoo animal or something. Everyone I've told about this has no idea what it is.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It was a huge force in my life.
Yeah.
Fen-Phen was a combination of diet drugs that were prescribed by a doctor, and they were a huge deal for about 3 years. And those were 3 years that I was in high school, and I got put on it. So I have a personal history with Fen-Phen and Redux.
So you were given this? You didn't go to the doctor and ask for it. It was like, we're concerned about your weight. Here's these weird pills that you, a 17-year-old, should start taking.
So I was 14.
Oh, wow.
I had been told to be concerned about my weight, so I was. And I was in high school, which is not a high point in critical thinking about values around appearance. So there was this miracle drug, and I was like, well, shit, yeah, I'll try that. There was a cover story on Time magazine, and the title was "The New Miracle Drug?" It was a huge media splash.
That's the thing where they can make a completely absurd claim, but as long as you put a question mark after it, you're not necessarily saying it. Like a picture of you on the cover of Time with like a child molester? Like that doesn't actually make it any less defamatory.
That's right.
So did it work for you?
So here's like they always take things so far. I get the point that he's trying to make, but like he could have taken a less severe example, because when he puts it like that, I can't tell if this is his point or not, but it's like he's comparing weight loss drugs to child molesters, and there's so far, even if you're against the diet culture and all this weight loss shit, and don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of weight loss pills or anything, but there's just something about that, and maybe I'm being nitpicky, but I'm like it's almost like bringing Hitler into an argument a little bit, where it's like you've taken this conversation far further than it needed to go. So am I wrong? Am I wrong? Because it's one of those things where it's like I see your point, but you took it a little too far.
I don't remember because I was on it for a really short time.
Okay.
I was on it, I think it was the last month that it was on the market. And I absolutely remember many, many, many women, adult women and teenage women in my life were on it. And I absolutely remember one person getting very, very angry when it was pulled from the market. And we'll talk about why. And what she said was, sure, it was a problem for some people, but it was the only one that really worked.
Right.
And I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the phrase, sure, it was a problem for some people, because the problems that it was for some people were big.
Do you remember its effects on you? Did it have like...
So I was never on phentermine or whatever this was that they're talking about. To a certain extent, I can, to a degree, understand the friend's frustration. I don't know what the major issues were for the pill, but like there's just as like semi allegory to it. Like I've never had a serious issue or anything with getting addicted to painkillers, but I'm very fucking accident prone, and so when I've broken one arm twice, I've also broken the other arm. I had a second degree burn. I've fallen down the stairs multiple times. I've had multiple muscle injuries, like serious strains and sprains and all that shit. And for when I broke my arm, they gave me like a shit ton of oxycodone. And I had not even touched 10% of the pills that they gave, because I'm the type of person that only takes it when I am like half beside myself and I can barely stand it. And so when I went, they're fucking offering me more pills. It was before the like crackdown on it. And then I several years later, many years later, got a second degree burn on my arm, and they gave me morphine at the hospital, but then they wouldn't give me anything for like at home. And after two days ish, you don't really need any, but for those 2 days, I really needed something stronger than Tylenol and ibuprofen. But the crackdown on it, because so many people got addicted to it, was where it came down. And so now it feels like there's a bit of an overcorrection. And so I understand the friend's kind of frustration to an extent, because it's harder to get pain medication that you need, including like there was this cough syrup. I've had pneumonia twice, and the first time was before the crackdown, and I got this huge ass bottle that I still have half of, because I never like they gave me far more than I needed. But when I got pneumonia the second time, and they're like, we're not going to give you any of this, it was like codeine cough syrup. That was the only way I could fucking sleep. It's the only way you can fucking sleep on with pneumonia, because pneumonia fucking sucks. And cough suppressants on pneumonia, when you have pneumonia, don't fucking work. So the crackdown on it meant that I couldn't get the codeine cough syrup. Thankfully, I'm a pack rat. I saved it from the last time. So even if it wasn't as effective, it helped enough that I could actually fucking sleep. So it's just, it's, I understand the frustration that because other people were affected, even if you aren't one of those people that's affected, it's still the fact that they were affected now affects you, and you can't get what you need, you know? So I'll be curious to hear what the effects of the phentermine were, because I don't really know much about it.
Is it one of those diet pills that's like basically speed and it just makes you sort of like weird and jumpy and shaky?
So fen-phen, when people say fen-phen, they're referring actually to 3 drugs. Oh. 2 pills, 3 drugs. So fen-phen itself was a combination of 2 existing diet pills, one called phentermine that had been introduced in 1959. So it had been around for like a while.
Okay.
People didn't like it. It was unpopular because so many people experienced racing hearts, shortness of breath. It was like very unpleasant to be on. The other fen in fen-phen is fenfluramine, which had been introduced in the 60s or 70s. It was unpopular because the weight loss that it caused was dramatic, but it was short-lived. So essentially, as soon as people went off the drug, the weight just came back.
As opposed to diets, which last forever, as we all know.
So these 2 things were like pretty unpopular diet drugs.
I know he's basically saying that, you know, diets and this pill were the same, but they're not. Like, if you're making a diet change, not going on a diet, it is supposed to be forever. Like, that makes sense. And to a certain extent, it makes sense with the pills, too. And that's part of the issue with weight loss pills, is that as soon as you're off them, it's very easy to gain the weight back because you didn't change any of your habits. It's not necessarily the fault of the drug.
Until they were combined in the early 90s, and a third medication was added. So that third medication is dexfenfluramine. Its sale name was Redux. And that's what really set this all off. So the first 2, phentermine and fenfluramine, are amphetamines. The third one, dexfenfluramine, I believe is a downer. So there was a predecessor to dexfenfluramine, to Redux, I should say, that was called Pondimin. And it was effective in weight loss, but the side effects were so dramatic that people didn't want to take it. The main side effect was that it would put people to sleep. So people reported sleeping 12 to 18 hours a day on Pondimin.
But they looked amazing.
So. Totally. They looked gorgeous asleep in their beds. Yes. So this was like such a big thing that the one of the sort of developers of Redux in selling it would say, well, of course people are losing weight on Pondamin. They have to be awake to eat. That was just like, they're just losing weight because they're asleep all the time. Yeah. So because fen-phen, the sort of combined medications of fen-phen, were existing drugs, as was Redux, right? It was sort of a revision of Pondamin. Mm-hmm. The manufacturers, researchers said that they assumed that those drugs were safe because they had been approved by the FDA. So their early internal tests were just for the effectiveness of weight loss. They didn't test for safety early on. The manufacturers, Wyeth and Interneuron, sunk a ton of money into developing these drugs.
So when was all this development taking place?
So this was all happening in the early 90s, leading up to a 1995 approval of Redux. That's sort of what sets all of this off. Mm-hmm. This is also happening in the 80s and 90s when more and more people are getting more and more concerned about their weight, their health, their attractiveness, right? Like that is taking center stage.
This is like the origin story of the wellness industrial complex.
Yes, absolutely. So it's like a very fraught time culturally. It's always kind of a fraught time for thinking and talking about healthy bodies, but this was a real crescendo.
Right. Double fraught.
So we're talking about multiple different drugs. Pondamin being rebranded as Redux is the big sort of starter's pistol for all of it. The researchers didn't test for safety. They only measured for weight loss effectiveness, which was high because it's an amphetamine, right? Like you are going to lose weight.
How does that work actually? Is it just an appetite suppressant or do you burn more calories because your nervous system is sped up?
You know, that I don't know. I know what the founders of Redux or sort of the researchers behind Redux sort of hypothesized, which is they believed that the reason that people were not losing weight was that they were using food as a drug to trigger their serotonin. So what they wanted to do was up people's levels of serotonin so that they would be happier without food.
Yeah, that doesn't sound convincing at all because then SSRIs, which also had a boom time during this time, would have also resulted in weight loss. And a lot of them, my understanding is they resulted in the opposite.
Yes, also SSRIs, not meth. So they start to move into FDA approval for Redux in particular. And the FDA approval process is pretty standard. You go to an advisory committee, you lobby them, they make a recommendation to the FDA, and then the FDA usually acts on that recommendation. Not always, but usually, right? So there is this advisory committee meeting where they are inviting people in support and in opposition to approving Redux. The people in support are the manufacturers, the pharmaceutical companies, Wyeth and Interneuron. Mm-hmm. And what they are talking about is we have an obesity epidemic in this country. They're throwing around this number that there are 300,000 deaths a year caused by being fat, and that this is our one shot to address this emerging epidemic, right? So they are like ringing the alarm.
Right.
Interestingly, the opponents are mostly doctors, and they are doctors who have read the research about the predecessors to these drugs. And they're cautioning about a few things. They're cautioning about heart disease, which phentermine and fenfluramine were both linked to. They're talking about something called primary pulmonary hypertension, which is a condition that destroys blood vessels in your heart and lungs.
Ooh, not great.
Not great. So one of the main source, I will say, not the only source, but certainly the main one, is a great book called Dispensing with the Truth by Alicia Mundy, who's a reporter who followed this case for a long time. She describes this as death by slow suffocation.
Oh, God.
And the other thing they're warning about is brain damage.
What kind of brain damage?
What they find out is that this is down the line, right? They don't know it at this point. At this point, the research they have shows that these drugs cause brain damage in lab rats, but they haven't tested for brain damage in humans.
Seems like you should do that, yes.
Mm-hmm. So they later find out that when people stopped taking fen-phen, again, we're talking about an amphetamine, their serotonin levels would plummet and stay low for a really long time because an overdose, quote unquote, of Redux, which is just like, you forgot you took a pill and you took another one just to be safe. That's an overdose, right? Like a very small amount of Redux. That makes your neurons that produce serotonin, it makes them sort of balloon up and then they wither and then they die.
So it's like that's your ability to feel happiness. So like you're diminishing the extent to which you can like be a happy person.
100.
I'm skeptical of that it caused from her description like serotonin receptors to that, like I can understand how it caused serotonin levels to plummet because if it did have like a little bit of meth in it, it's going to have to spike and agitate the serotonin producers in your brain in order to make more. So not having that medication, and if you've been on it for a while, the serotonin in your brain has not been regulated on its own for a while. So I could understand how serotonin levels could plummet, but the blow up, wither, and then die, like your serotonin receptors die. It doesn't sound completely right, unless I'm mishearing what she's saying here. It's interesting though. This is going to be kind of an interesting episode because I really don't have any significant background in this at all, and I'm not really sure where I would start the research on it to kind of verify their points, just because it was this very set period of time, and I don't know how much research has actually been done since. And I'm not sure, because she said that phentermine was only like part of it, and there were two more, and I don't even remember the names because I'm fucking awful with names. So I don't know. This is interesting. If you have more of a background in this, I'd love to hear your opinion on this whole thing, because this is kind of outside my wheelhouse.
It is a brain damage that will lead to long-term depression.
Wow. What's interesting about this is this idea of like sacrificing health to focus on weight. The story we've always been told about weight is that it's not necessarily weight itself. It's that weight is correlated with cholesterol and heart disease and blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, even when we have the cholesterol and the heart disease numbers in front of us, we're like, no, it's about weight. Like the weight has to come down.
Yep.
It's like, oh, we might cause heart disease by reducing the weight. But if the weight is only a problem because it causes heart disease, then why would that be a trade-off we'd be willing to make?
What we see in those hearings is the FDA and doctors grappling in real time with what matters more. If it matters more to get patients thin, but put them at the risk of heart disease and lung issues and brain damage.
Well, to be fair, they'd probably be at risk of heart disease and lung issues regardless because of their weight. So I could see how this was kind of a struggle of figuring out which mitigating factors are more highly affected. Is the weight more dangerous, or is the medication more dangerous? It's one of those things where, like, if it's given to someone who's morbidly obese, then the risk of heart disease and breathing issues from the weight is probably higher than that which would have generated from the medication. So, like, from my understanding of general medical practices, is that it's all about weighing of costs versus benefits, especially when it comes to medication. So this makes perfect sense to me.
Process, or if their heart and lungs and brain should be left alone, as should their weight.
Right.
And it's really an open question, and people talk about this really openly. So there's this quote from that Time magazine cover story, "The new miracle drug?" ?
The miracle?
So this is the quote from that piece. This is straight from the writer. "That risk, of course, and the still unquantified chance of brain damage have yet to be weighed against the danger of remaining fat, which is considerable.
Right.
Severe obesity puts people at risk for heart disease, diabetes, and some cancers. If Redux can help these people get thin, it might be worth the risk."
Right. Even if it results in all those people getting heart disease.
And dying, right?
Yeah.
Like, so part of what's happening...
It amazes me that if even if it results in all those people getting heart disease, one, it's not guaranteed that all of them would get heart disease, just as you guys like to say, well, it's not guaranteed that anyone's going to get heart disease from obesity. It's the question of the risk factor. Are they more likely to get heart disease and suffer different heart issues at their morbid obesity, or is the medication a higher risk? This is a matter of risk assessment. So sometimes, yes, sometimes someone losing weight, even if the medication has the risk of causing heart disease, well, so does the morbid obesity. So if the risk of heart disease is higher based on their level, their weight, like if they are super morbidly obese, then chances are their risk of heart disease and heart issues is much higher than it is with the medication. And not only that, but the other things that they've mentioned, the risk of type 2 diabetes, the risk of cancer. All of these risks go into determining who is right for the medication. That's why there's been more of a look of risk per person, and it's not, medication isn't necessarily handed out willy-nilly, because it's a matter of risk assessment. If you are only slightly obese, just slightly obese, then the risk factor may not, of you getting a heart disease, cancer, diabetes, may not be more than the risk of heart disease on the medication, so they would not necessarily give that to you. Now, granted, this was at a time when medication was a little bit more freely given, so I understand why that was kind of an issue, but these are talks that kind of have to happen. I don't understand why they have such an issue with this.
The sort of tentpole story, the sort of human interest story that holds up a lot of the fen-phen and Redux panic is a young woman named Mary Lennon who starts taking fen-phen and Redux in the lead up to her wedding. She's 29 years old. Very quickly, she starts to lose energy for wedding planning. Within a month or so, she starts having shortness of breath just walking up a flight of stairs, which was not normal for her.
Yeah.
And within a year of taking the drug, she actually passes away from primary pulmonary hypertension. She does not get to get married.
Wow. So she kept taking it even as she had all these worsening side effects?
So here's the trick about fen-phen and Redux. These side effects set in with as little as 2 months on the drugs, and the maximum prescription advised by Wyeth and Interneuron is 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Because they're like, we know that they lose effectiveness anyway after 3 months, so we're just going to cut it off there. So the FDA committee meets, the advisory committee meets, they take in all the testimony, they vote 5-3 to reject Redux for approval. But a few hours later, a few of the committee members go to the chair of the committee and say that they have uneasy feelings about sort of how they manage this and they want to reopen the conversation. So they schedule another meeting for 2 months later. It's in direct conflict with a major neuroscience conference.
Okay.
So in addition to that, opponents are saying that they weren't invited to the second meeting. So both it was scheduled in conflict with something that opponents would care a lot about, and folks were not getting invited to speak again. So only the manufacturers showed up. And the vote flips.
Shit.
Yup.
So that's how we got fen-phen, that they scheduled this meeting on like Super Bowl weekend for brain doctors.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And like, it's also worth noting at this point that France and England were already publicly considering taking similar drugs off the market. The U.S. is sort of behind the times.
Right. The only issue on which we are behind the times.
Yeah, that's the only one.
And then we stopped doing that because it's bad.
So the FDA was not legally bound to take this recommendation, right? It's an advisory committee. They can decide to take that advice or not.
But it's basically, what you're saying is it's the same set of facts. They say the drug isn't safe, and then a couple months later they're like, whoops, it's safe. But nothing in the underlying information has actually changed. It's just the makeup of who showed up to a little conference room that day.
Yeah, there's no new information.
Right.
So the FDA takes their recommendation, takes the advisory committee's recommendation. Interestingly, they take it over the objections of their own staff, particularly scientists and researchers on staff who are like, hey, there are some big research questions to answer here.
Yeah, there's a lot of depressed rats that have, that have some input on this process.
But part of the reason that it gets approved seems to be that there is this cultural shift happening at the FDA. Sort of in the 80s and 90s, they shift from talking about themselves as a consumer watchdog group to using this phrase, the industry are our customers.
Ooh.
Right. So they're saying that like drug manufacturers are their customers and that they have to provide customer service to their customers.
Which means like consistency and speed, all of the things that essentially work in opposition to the public interest.
Absolutely. And also, if they refuse to approve Redux, because the chemical formula is so similar to Pondamin, they would also have to recall Pondamin, which would basically just be a bunch of work.
Right. It's a hassle.
It's a big hassle. It's a big headache.
Wow.
So once Redux is approved, these two drug companies, the manufacturers of fen-phen and Redux, launch a gigantic marketing campaign.
Oh, are these those ads that they show on TV where it's like, lovely, and we're playing in fields, and like, you won't ever be fat anymore, and everything is great, and then like the dude comes on who talks really fast, and he's like, this may cause you to kill all of your children. And you're like, wait, what?
Part of what they do, this is a thing that I got really hung up on, they define their ideal customer, and they talk about it internally as Roxanne Redux is the name.
I have no idea how to verify any of this information. I'm not sure where I would start. Again, if anyone has more of a background on this than I do, I would love to hear your perspective in the comments. It does not surprise me that they had like an ideal customer and that they even named it. I mean, this is even true. If you've seen any of the like GameStop employee training videos, I've never worked at GameStop, but those were leaked at one point. And I was watching, and it was specific. There was one specifically on how to address women. They get kind of fucking nutty a little bit, but this is unfortunately just the side of business, and it's one of the things where I'm like, actually, no, I agree. I think like medications and like the medical industry being overly privatized and treated as a business rather than as like tools for a specific purpose. Like it's the issue with such a wide scope of what's allowed to be a for-profit business in the US especially. I can't say that I disagree with them that this was an issue. I wish I knew more about these different medications. Again, though, I'd love to hear your perspective. I have no idea how interesting this part's going to be. We're almost halfway through already, so we'll be wrapping up here within another 15 minutes or so.
I'm imagining a sort of like Rosie the Riveter character.
100%.
She's just really depressed from like taking this drug for too long.
Having a hard time breathing. Yep.
I haven't felt pleasure in 3 years, but look how skinny I am.
So they define Roxanne Redux as their perfect customer. They say she's quote unquote pink collar. So sort of like middle America, right? 35 to 54, needs to lose 50 or more pounds, and they include the phrase, tried everything.
Oh my God.
So they're specifically marketing to people who are disillusioned.
Yeah, and desperate.
And very desperate, right?
Yeah.
Part of their marketing strategy is that they do these roadshow of diet seminars, quote unquote, that are designed to sell Redux. So this is like, when they describe it, it sounds to me very much like motivational speaker seminars, right? Where they're like, come to the Red Lion on Sunday afternoon. Join us at the Sheridan. The interesting thing about the Redux seminars is that they have all the facilitators are sales reps, but they all wear white lab coats. And they don't tell people that they're sales reps unless they are asked.
No way.
Right. So they are like very clearly presenting themselves as medical authorities, right? That's a clear signal. And they're only addressing that if the thought crosses someone else's mind enough for them to ask them.
That's like walking around downtown in like a police officer's uniform and then being like, why would you assume that I'm a police officer, sir? I'm just giving you orders about what to do. You haven't even asked me if I'm a real police officer.
Right. It's medical stolen valor. So not anything that they're saying, but just the approaches that they're taking, these like white lab coats, right? The whole thing just feels gross to me.
Have they said anything, or is there any information on what happens after this 3 months?
I mean, this whole marketing campaign, this was an issue not just for weight loss medication, but kind of across the board in the late 90s and early aughts, and possibly even into the early 2010s. I don't remember when it stopped, really, but I remember a time when there was just this flood of medication infomercials and commercials and stuff on TV. And maybe it still happens, and it's just the fact that I don't watch TV much anymore. But I remember it felt particularly egregious when I was growing up. And I think I want to be clear. I'm not saying that it's not an issue, and I'm not saying it wasn't like a negative thing to happen, because I to an extent I kind of agree with that perspective. I just think that it's important to remember that this was not just in terms of weight loss medication. There were a variety of medications on the market that the representatives and stuff behaved in this way.
It feels extra predatory to me to be like, oh, we need to find desperate women who need to lose 50 pounds. These are going to be people that are in extremely vulnerable emotional places. And then even if it works, the minute you stop taking it, surely, if you're not taking amphetamines anymore, everything goes back to normal. You're not like hopped up. So all the weight comes back. So like, what are you actually doing?
Right. So that's like that's a big part of this. And again, like brings me back to that.
And for me, that is the signal of the issue with looking for a quick fix. Looking to medication to wholly take care of your weight issue. Medication can be used as a tool under certain circumstances, but it has to be done in conjunction with diet changes and exercise. Otherwise, it's not going to be sustainable, because the minute you come off medications like that, you're going to gain the weight back if you have not developed habits conducive to healthy weight management.
Friend who was like, it's the only one that really worked. And I'm like, ooh, we need to have a conversation about what it really worked means to you.
Right, what's worked, yeah.
The other part that I will say that really struck me about their PR campaign, we haven't talked about this yet, is that a big part of it is investing in what Alicia Mundy, this reporter, calls Obesity Inc.
Ooh, right.
Because there is now an obesity epidemic, right, quote unquote, there is a little industry that is cropping up around like, okay, this is now a medical thing. How do we make money off of this medical thing?
Right.
So part of Wyeth's marketing plan is that they make huge donations to anti-obesity organizations. So they are very aware and very conscious that the more that they can ramp up anxiety about an obesity epidemic, the more they can make it seem like a serious medical problem, the more that they can sell.
And the more that they can cast themselves as the good guys, because all we're trying to do is make Americans healthier. That's it. We're just trying to save lives.
Right. We're just trying to help.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
I hate because they have a valid point with the way that for-profit medical companies can prey on the general public for health concerns, and I think that's a valid critique. But I hate that this is coming from the perspective of the only reason why we would necessarily view, like, it feels like they're painting it as though the only reason why we would view obesity as a medical issue is because of the marketing campaigns and the greed of these companies, when it's more like the concern is constantly brought up and stuff to fuel and raise anxiety and push for a panic and an immediate fix sort of mindset, which I think was more the issue in order to get their medication out there and get people talking about it and get people wanting it, is because it isn't the concern of obesity that will facilitate buying this medication. It is a sense of impending doom and immediate fix. People need an immediate fix to it that would facilitate that medication being marketed and successfully purchased. It's the fueling public panic that's the issue, not the public concern over weight loss.
So within 3 months of the introduction of Redux, it catches on like wildfire. Also, at this point, it has been 23 years since the FDA last approved a diet drug.
Oh, wow. So people are just clamoring. It's like the people in Mad Max, under the waterfall. And their kids are just standing there with the bucket, give me anything.
And all they've been hearing all the time is if you don't drink water, you're going to be real unhealthy. You're probably going to die real soon if you don't drink some water. So they know, but also the anxiety is getting ramped up so much. So within a few months of the introduction of Redux, according to Time Magazine, doctors were writing 85,000 prescriptions a week.
Oh, wow.
And by 1997,
something that's worth just chiming in here is that these companies actually, and there's a whole website dedicated to transparency around this, but some doctors do take payments and basically bribes to push their patients to take this medication and prescribe more of these medications, even if it goes against risk assessment, and even if the patients don't necessarily need it as much. I think it's less of an issue now because of these watchdog organizations, but that was something that was also an issue with the opiate crisis, because doctors were getting kind of paid off to prescribe these things and prescribe a lot of the medication to make those companies more money, and the doctors would get a kickback. So that was also probably in the works somewhere. And I don't know, I'm feeling multiple ways, because I feel like what they're saying here has validity to it, but it feels like it's being grouped in with other weight loss, even though they're not saying it explicitly, because they're framing it as, oh, it was just because the person's fat and therefore all this bad stuff happened. It almost feels like they're using that as a justification for, you should not try to lose weight. Perhaps I'm reading too much into that because I've just been around fat acceptance so much, but I think there was some genuine issues around these drugs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the concern around obesity is inherently tied to corporate profit.
They are projecting $220 million in sales of Redux alone. Not even Fen-Phen, just Redux.
Nice.
So they are printing money.
Aubrey, you're good at this. This is fun.
Oh, yay. Thanks,
this
buddy.
Is dope. Yes.
Appreciate it. I just stumbled into this thing and I was like, oh, this story is bitchin'.
I can tell how much you love this. It's such a good story.
I really love it. I might die of heart failure later because I took it. Who knows?
It's worth it.
It's worth it. Avenge me. So the other thing that feels important to highlight here is that Fen-Phen and Redux seriously fed pill mills.
I have been wanting to write an article about this. Tell me what pill mills are.
So pill mills, my understanding of pill mills is that they are essentially like doctor's offices that are mostly just fronts to get people prescriptions that they want. Right?
Yes.
So In this case, it provided doctors with this sort of easy.
Honestly, though, this still exists today and for a variety of medications. There are doctors that more or less exist as a way for people to get the medication that they want. They're mostly online now, but it is something where you can basically go in and request a specific medication and get it. I'm not going to say how I know those exist. For the record, I have not done this, but I know people that have. I guess I'll just leave it at that. It is very much possible those still exist today, and it's not just for weight loss, it's for any number of things. So they exist. That much is true. I will give them that.
Cash flow, right? Like you're not going through insurance. You don't have to deal with all of the red tape. It's essentially like retail medicine.
I have heard various rumors of these over the years, especially when it comes to diet pills, because people are so desperate, and that every once in a while, one of these like white collar cases will pop up in the news where there's like some doctor who's writing like 25,000 prescriptions a month, like to the point where like if you were signing these, it would be physically impossible to sign that many prescriptions.
Right. So like in Alicia Mundy's book, Dispensing with the Truth, there are many firsthand accounts of people who are like, oh yeah, I went into a doctor's office. I did not talk to a doctor. I talked to a med tech who took my blood pressure and some like baseline vitals, right? And then they gave me a prescription. It becomes such...
So that much is kind of a lie. You can't just speak to a med tech and get a prescription. There is either a doctor or a nurse practitioner that is in there that is prescribing the medication, because those are the people that can prescribe. A med tech cannot necessarily prescribe you medication. So there is like a licensed doctor, or at the very least a licensed nurse practitioner in the works in these. It's not that loose. It's loose, but it's not that loose. Just I want to make sure that's clear. And we have about 3 more minutes of the podcast to listen to, and then I'm going to cut this video off.
A big deal that there are 800 numbers that you can call. 1-888-4-FEN-FEN.
Oh my God.
It's one of the numbers. So you just call them and they send you diet pills, or they get you a prescription, right?
Wait, isn't that too many letters for fen-phen? Is it F-E-N-F-E-N?
Yeah, they misspell
okay.
it.
Okay.
That's how they get around it, is they misspell it.
Yeah, this is like a European phone number all of a sudden. Okay.
So it also becomes such an issue and such a huge flashpoint around weight loss that weight loss companies like Nutrisystem and Jenny Craig start figuring out how to weave fen-phen and Redux into their programs.
Ooh.
This becomes such a big thing that, if you remember Mary Lennon, the woman who died before her wedding, her lawyer is married to a woman who's a doctor. And at the time of Mary's death, that doctor had already been offered, and I quote, a couple $1,000s per month on the side for signing pads of prescription slips for fen-phen and Redux.
Ooh.
That was an offer that was not made by a manufacturer. It was not made by their sales team. It was made by these like large weight loss corporations, so that essentially you could go into one of their diet centers and walk out with a prescription.
So Weight Watchers was just like spraying people with fen-phen in a mist, like produce at the grocery store for everybody that came to one of their meetings. Just
yeah, they're like the perfume counter where they're just like, oh.
You know, if you spray it in front of you and then walk into it, that's the best way to apply it.
So interestingly, this is a section in my notes that I've titled The Beginning of the End.
Ooh.
So they do a bunch of research into fen-phen and Redux because they noticed that patients who've been on fen-phen and Redux are starting to be diagnosed with heart disease.
How long has it been on the market at this point?
At this point, I think these reports start to come in like at scale in like 1996. So that'd be like a year.
Okay. So pretty soon after it's hit the market.
Very soon. And what they find is that in their one clinic, this clinic called Merit Care in Fargo, Fargo's a city of about 77,000 people. This one clinic finds 11 cases of heart disease. So this is like a very high incidence.
Right.
They do a little rough back of the envelope math, and primary pulmonary hypertension, which is sort of what they're dealing with here, right, is generally really rare as a sort of naturally occurring phenomenon. So they do a little math, and they find that if their data is right, taking fen-phen and Redux increases the risk for primary pulmonary hypertension by 2,300 times.
Oh, shit.
Right.
So it's like one of those towns that's like next to a nuclear waste site.
Totally.
Where like all the kids are born with like eyeballs facing inwards or whatever. It's just like really obvious.
So then the Mayo Clinic starts looking into it, and then the New England Journal of Medicine publishes something about it, and the story breaks in this huge way on July 9th, 1997. So it's on 60 Minutes, it's on the Today Show, it's on CNN. It is a humongous news story. Wyeth, one of the manufacturers, responds to it. One of their VPs says, this isn't a study, it's just an observation.
What do you think studies are? How do you think people study things?
So he said,
All right. I think I'm gonna I'm gonna leave it there. But uh a study is different from an observation. Like there's overlapping qualities, but they are different, and to act as though they are one and the same is not helping your point at all. But I've had enough for today, so I'm just going to leave it. I don't really have much else to say. This is just kind of I don't know. Well, I was wondering if I should continue following maintenance phase, but then I see the next episode after, like, in the next round of these videos I do is Snackwell cookies, which I loved Snackwell cookies growing up, so I'd like to take a look at that one. This is interesting, but I feel like I don't have enough background knowledge of this to give quality commentary. I'll go ahead and finish this episode next week, but I don't have much to say. If you have more of a background in this, I'd love to hear your perspective, but otherwise I don't really have much to add. And I don't really have much to say in terms of what I'm reading, or anything like that, so I guess we're just going to end it here today. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.